So I want to talk about the start of the product development journey. As a product manager, I've seen different product managers and different organizations have a lot of different ways to do this. And I will present some of the ways. I think the key part here is to be flexible, but also to understand the product manager's role. And what I'll say, a very strategic approach toward, doing the things that a product manager needs to do in terms of this. Before I get started, again, I wanted to thank our sponsors. You've heard them just recently in the intros, Pragmatic Institute, Texas McCombs. I'm certified with Pragmatic on everything what they've done recently, which is, I think, data science and some design, which looks really interesting. I am not a full-blown graduate of Texas McCombs School of Business, but I've gotten an executive education certificate from them, which is a really great school. And then 280 Group, which actually later on you'll see I've used some of their material. And Tom Evans, I don't know if Tom knows that, but I'll let him know. And then, hey, when we're back in person, maybe we can get back to the Norris Conference Center to be in person. A little bit about me. I have been in the tech space for over 20 years. I have been both in product management and product marketing with a lot of different roles that cover hardware, software, and services. Started out as my career as a cost accountant. So, if you ever remember back in those cost accounting classes, if you ever took them, there were these really wacky things called under and overapplied overhead allocations. Somehow that clicked once I started doing that stuff versus being in a classroom. But hey, ask me about that sometime. Also, my name's not on the Oscar, but I had a product that won a Technical Academy Award back in 2015. That when I was with HP, the Dream Color display, we had co-developed that with DreamWorks and a few of the other animation studios. I'm also a proud Oklahoma State Cowboy. I know for those of you in Austin, it's a different shade of orange, but that's okay. Also, I'm located in Houston, a little east of Austin, but have been there many times. Look forward to being there again in person. So just to get started, talking about the product development lifecycle, I guess that's really the development side needs to be in here, and the iterations within these areas. The iterations go in with across this entire spectrum of the process, as well as within each one. Most of you all probably know that. I'm going to come at this perspective of kind of both the hardware and the software and things in between, because I think there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of not so much overlap when you talk about kicking off, a new product concept and the definition. And in a non-software product world, that you get once you get into development or deployment, there's things you really can't change very quickly, versus if you're in the software world, especially if you're doing release trains, you're going to have a constant cadence of being able to continually, continuous iteration, continuous deployment of your product. And so when you look at those kind of things, you look at in the concept of the definition stage, you're going to do a canvas, a product canvas, and I'll get into that here in the next slide. And then how to really want to talk about how you move from the product canvas to a requirements document. And there's different names for that. I am not going to get into any kind of debates on what it's called. It can be called a lot of things. There's a lot of discussion in the product management community of how deep you go or not go. But those are really the processes that I want to get into today. So to start off with, just some definitions I came across on the web about a product canvas. It's a planning tool. It's something that it really came out of the agile methodologies. It's a very high level. When you get into like very lean oriented things, again, it's typically a one pager. And that's, I think, part of the leanness and the agileness of what a product canvas is and what it's meant to be. At a high level, just to be simple about it, I see it's for a product manager to paint the picture of the product. What is the product going to do? What is the product what problem is it going to solve? What customer issue does it resolve and make life better for the customer? What is the experiences? There's a lot that you get into it, but at a highest level, a product canvas should be a broad brush of what all those things and others should be doing. When it comes to formats, there's a lot of different ones out there, and I just want to share you some examples of that. This is just one of the higher level ones. Again, talking about the name of the product, what the goal, what your metrics are, what your target market and target customer sets are. What is that big picture? Again, this is supposed to be a big picture type of document, and hopefully not more than a page. I have seen multiple page canvases, some that don't make sense and some for good reason. And maybe you get into issues of how compartmentalized is the product going to be? How many different iterations do you have? And to that point, you're going to probably have to do this several times in your concept of iteration before you get, okay, we're all in concurrence on what this product is going to do. Another view of it that's very pretty from a color standpoint is a broader brush, a broader amount of different things to focus on. And then when you drill down another level, it's really, you look at the very specifics of this. And this might be more than one page because it asks a lot of questions. But the ultimate idea about this is then you have to address a lot of these at some point, whether it's at this very early canvas stage as you're doing that product ideation, you're trying to figure out what is it that we need to build or make to solve the customer's problems or to meet a market need that you've identified. But that's what you do here. You need to identify, the opportunities, who's involved. You also see at the bottom a lot of product marketing kind of things, that evangelism area where you've got to do some elevator pitches and do some digital marketing identification. Maybe you get that from other people. Go to market kind of things. There's a lot of things that aren't around the product. If it's a piece of hardware or a piece of software, but you've got to figure out how it's delivered to customers. That's the very strategic part about this. There's elements where when you're doing this process, it may be less 50% of this or more, maybe not directly about the product. It's just how it's sold or how it's delivered or how it's supported, those kind of things. So we want to address that. Different view of things, this whiteboard, this baby. Let's take a look at what, if you're used to doing sprint planning, design sprints, you're at a whiteboard or you're in one of those tools that look like a whiteboard or act like a whiteboard. You can do this as a visual representation of, what the vision is, what your personas are, what are workflows that you might need. Some of you all may be a developer in your background, and I'll talk about this a little more. A lot of it depends on our background, might dictate how this is put forth. Again, my whole point is there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to write a canvas. And there's different levels of detail you may need to get into at this stage. Another one more from a release train perspective that gets pretty technical looking. And you can look at roles, principal roles. You've got to lay out what people are doing in this type of cadence, and what are those value streams, and what support do you need to do that. Again, that's above the product specific need. And again, the point is, as a product manager, you're going to need to understand well beyond the actual product what you want to do and how that product. And sometimes customers value how it's delivered to them more so than the actual functionality of the product. So, you need to understand what that is and address it accordingly at this stage. One of the things I like about this format is it's still a bit high level, and it talks about some of the key things that you need to think about. And there's a particular order here, and maybe not just about the numbers, but ultimately, then what do you need to do now? What do you need to do later? And how do you get there? What do you do in between? And then at that bottom section is, how will we know we'll get it right? So you also have to think about what are the metrics that we need? What are those KPIs and OKRs, however you want to apply those? And you can apply those different ways, but you really want to have a view of this. And again, painting the picture, a complete picture of how you want your product to be, how do you want it to come out to the market to meet those needs? And we'll get into a little bit more about some of the processes internal to that. And sometimes it's, again, based on various people's background. Sometimes, you have to bring a team together to work through this. But I really like this one more than the other ones, just when you can compartmentalize the now and the later, and what do you think you need to do to get there? As well as then, what are the measurements that you have once you release the product, once you've launched something, maybe you've ramped it up after X months and you have some results you want to achieve. So again, I don't really intend to debate the naming of this. I called it product requirements document. There's things called a marketing requirements document. There's also things called a software requirements specification. I've seen this very distinctly different, and I've seen all this combined into one document. Maybe it's called one of these things, but it includes its product requirements and marketing requirements, which, think about the canvases before this was, there are some marketing and go-to-market kind of things that you may want to outline and address that helps the product be successful. So there's a lot of things that you can call this, but ultimately you need to shift that focus from that higher level canvas to some more details within a requirements document, so that way your development team and other folks involved in bringing that product to market understand the intent. And you as a product manager need to be that leader of keeping that through the whole process. But you have to set the tone with this going from the product canvases to then a more detailed type of requirements document for your teams to then understand how to get things built, or what do they need to build. And maybe sometimes you get into the how they need to build it, but I'll get into that in a second. So a little bit of overview about, and I think we've all seen this in our careers of product feature focused and outcome focused. And a lot of us are always, what are we trying to solve? What is the customer's problem we're trying to solve? And that is, there's an outcome there. You want to work backwards from that outcome to figure out how to get there. And then you've got products that are already shipping, they're already released, you're enhancing them. And that can mean a lot of things, but it may just really be I'm adding a feature, right, to the product. I don't know if this is really I think of Uber, and Uber was just for getting around, driving around. Then you've got Uber Eats, and you've got all these other things that they've added as I'm sure the product managers for Uber Eats saw it as a product and it was the outcome, but at a higher level, it was really an additional feature of the Uber app, let's say. Also things like, I know some of my more recent experiences were in the hardware tech space. I typically don't have something that says, I need a box that has this shape. I may say, I could say that. I could say, I need this box, this shape, or I need it to be no bigger than this or no smaller than that. And that's part of somewhere in that in-between phase of this process. Something I talked about at a previous product camp was specifications. And there's a little bit of wrinkle here if you're really in a big kind of tech hardware space, you're really putting things that I'll call design specifications that are, can really dictate exactly how the product is to be. It's like, I want it to be this size, this weight, a very specific, I'll just call it industrial design type of specification, and so then your engineering team doesn't have a lot of leeway, if any at all, on how the product is going to at least look and feel, versus a performance specification that describes how the product is to perform. So I could say, I need an API to do this. and leave it it's vague, but if you're clear on what the outcome and what that result is to be, and you have a development team that you're allowing them to be more creative on their process, and a lot of that might need to be on how well you know your development team. Are they creative or not? Can you give them a specification that is somewhat vague, but it's very clear on what the end result should be? It's just those kind of things are stuff to think about when you're getting to the next level of detail on your requirements document. And so thinking about the previous slide, generally speaking, a design specification is usually very feature oriented, whereas a performance spec is more than likely something that's outcome oriented. So obviously when you work through the process, the natural outcome of a design spec is usually it's very feature focused. Then a natural outcome of a performance spec is it's usually outcome focused. So some of the things in the process you need to do go along these lines. So a lot of us know Marty Kagan out of Silicon Valley. He has, I can't remember which edition and which book this came out of, but I'm giving him credit, right? High level key elements of a PRD. And also I know there's a lot of debate on, again, PRD, is it dying? Maybe it is, but ultimately, like I said before, I don't care what it's called. There's still a need of some sort of requirements document that we as product managers need to do, whether it's really the old-fashioned PRD versus a MRD versus whatever. But ultimately, forget about that. Think about these 4 features, these 4 elements of that requirement side. You're defining a purpose, you're describing the features. Back to my previous conversations around how detailed do you describe those features. Then you set some criteria on when to release the product, when to launch the product, maybe not just when, but what trigger points are there. Again, if you're in a release train, that's a cadence that you've got to figure out how you fit into the train, and that cadence of what elements of the software package you're going to release to market. And that goes into the sketch out the timing, right? So that's the high level. But again, that sounds very simple, but you need to do at least a few pages of a requirements document that's beyond the canvas. And that's valid. And maybe you just have a lot of performance specifications that describe the outcome of what you want out of that product, and let the development team be as creative as they can to come out with what they need. Again, the issue may be in that process, you got to make sure they don't go overboard with over-speccing something. And I've experienced that a lot, especially in the hardware world, where you can't change things until you get a whole new revision of a product or replacement product. But then on the other hand, you could get very detailed, you had this or this. Well, that bottom thing, you might have a 5,000 to 10,000 word document to describe a lot of things. One example I had a few years ago is that I had about a 5,000 word document, and I don't know, that's just because Word told me how many words I wrote, and all the elements and all the feedback I got from my fellow team members. But in reality, only about 40% of the document talked about the product. The other 60% were talking about, go to market, product delivery support, just market opportunities, just all sorts of things that we wanted to make sure that part of the success of the product wasn't just having a product that did X or Y, it was how we provided additional service around the box, if you will, or around the product. So the answer is it depends. And it depends on several things, high level. I talked about the spec types. I talked about product versus non-product items. Again, things like, in the hardware world, supply chain, or the software world, how delivery and back-end support is. If you're doing a front end app, what about the back end? How is the back end dealt with? What happens when a customer calls in with an issue? Or, is it just something that you're replacing a current product with something that's newer, shinier? Or is it a game changer someone's never seen? And you have to probably go into a bit more detail on a game-changing product, but there's a lot of other factors. Here are a lot of other factors, and I talk about just enough details, and that I will give credit. I've heard that from 2 different Pragmatic Institute instructors, and I like to use it, even though this is a long list. This is a lot of details. It looks like a lot of details, but at every level, you might need to give just enough to help your development team or your other stakeholders in the product world help make the product successful. So again, product market opportunities. What are the customer problems? How does that relate to product market fit? And what more details in terms of what are the objectives and functionalities of the product that you foresee are needed to make it work and to be successful? And then, as I said, non-product items. What is your go-to-market strategy? Is it something that maybe it's something that needs to be different, so you need to outline that our go-to-market strategy may not have been successful previously. We need to do something very different. So you need to go into a bit more detail, because at some points, some of that may affect what a developer in the back end is thinking about, what it means to, we're going to do this. This is how this product is going to market. Maybe there's a partner involved. Maybe there's some other aspect to how the product is delivered differently. And so you need to understand that, so that, especially maybe in terms of back-end developers, they know that I've got to do something different as well. Same thing with supply chain or delivery. And I split those up because supply chain is more on the hardware side. Delivery is usually on the software side, service support. Development priorities, trade-offs. A lot of us go into product development, and you've got to be clear with your development team. What is it? Is it cost? Is it schedule? Is it differentiated items? Is it something else? Typically, it's at least 3 legs of the stool, and you got to keep them all balanced. And they're usually, who hasn't had this come up where, during development, there's a point that something's happened, and you need to make a trade-off decision. Our costs aren't coming in line, or our schedule is slipping. What do you do? Do you trade cost for schedule? Do you trade it for quality? You've got to understand the trade-offs throughout the whole process. And again, thinking about what you wrote in the Canvas stage that hopefully developed into the requirements document can give a good outline to where it's not, ultimately, I would say that if you've done that right, you're not having to debate it very, very long when there's a trade-off decision that has to be made. Also, you got to understand, if you've done both hardware and software, or you're doing both at the same time, there's a lot of integrations. There's a lot of, gating type of development cycles. You might have some third-party integration involved. You got to do that stuff. And then some summary financials, because ultimately, as much as some of us have tried to adhere to a pure kind of product management perspective, if you're in any kind of business, ultimately someone's going to want to know what the financials are, right? And what the ROI is. So at some level, maybe not at every level within product management, at some level, financials are involved, and you need to be well versed in that. So kind of to wrap it up, and here's something from 280 Group and one of their tools of really, in terms of that shift of requirements planning and documentation to development, as this crossover of product managers should be focused mostly on the who and the why, and a little bit of the what, while on the engineering or developer side is the what and the how. Again, maybe sometimes when I've seen developers who've turned into product managers, which is a great transition, but they're also can put out design specs as part of the what. So there's a crossover there, and you can see the iterations here of the cycles, because as we know, throughout the journey of product development, you're going to have to, want to learn fast, fail fast, and then reiterate. And that's where some of these arrows flip to, is, between why and what, especially of making sure you get it right before a product shipped, or you're maybe shipping a product that the customer doesn't even want. So to wrap it up, and hopefully give a couple minutes for questions, takeaways. There's a lot of formats and tools involved. There's be flexible in which you use. Iterations is the name of the game. Make sure you connect the dots from that high-level canvas to your requirements document. That there's so many things that get missed, and so when it comes to just enough details, in terms of the product management perspective, you better have a lot of details, even if it doesn't always come out in the requirements document. Make sure that you're addressing everything you need to address up front, so that your developers and engineers can understand clearly what they're expected to do. Talk about specifications, focus on the who and what, and just, again, you've got to balance how much is just enough details. So thanks for listening. These are ways you can contact me. And Ryan, if you're still there, I'll open up to any questions for any amount of time that we have left.
Andy, this is Roger Colvin. Good presentation. I sort of align with a lot of things that you outlined philosophically, as far as really focusing on the who and the why, and leaving the further details to sort of a role other than product management. One of the things that I wanted to offer, though, was with requirements. One way that I like to look at requirements is all that we're trying to do is solve problems. That's what we're trying to do. And if that's all that we're trying to do, the outcome is that we want to solve the problem. So a requirement is nothing more than a specification of the conditions that would indicate the absence of the problem. That's it. If we describe what it looks like for those problems no longer to exist, those are the requirements.
So let me throw a question back at you. So what if your engineers or developers say, I can't do that, I need more info?
They definitely need more info, but that starts going into the design, right? Like, how are we going to achieve that outcome? How are we going to solve this problem? But then once you're answering that question, it's design.
Yeah, and I could see that, I guess, and I'm curious to know if anyone has these other experiences in regards to, if you already have a product out on the market and you're doing a feature that is highly dependent on its look and feel, whether it's a front-end app or a product, something that's, a phone, a computer, a pencil. Does anyone have any elements where they, because I know I've been on product teams where we're doing the added feature, yet we had to comply with a lot of, it needs to look like this. We need to have these color schemes. I mean, it was already, part of the point is it's already set forth from the original product development.
But what problem, yeah, so what I would ask is, what problem are you trying to avoid or solve with that consistent look and feel, right? What's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? Presumably, if you didn't have a consistent look and feel, that causes a problem for the end users. If you define that problem and what it means for that problem to exist, then that's the requirement. And it doesn't mean it must be consistent with the existing look and feel. It could be it could involve the user's workflow and their ability to efficiently carry out that workflow without getting confused or without having a negative emotions or frustration as they are carrying out that workflow.
Okay. And that's great info. We've got to flip out of here, but I urge you all to go to the Slack Yellow channel, and we can continue the conversation there, and look forward to seeing you all throughout the rest of the day.